This episode is brought to you by the CityCX newsletter, a new tool for strategies and a guide for cities to connect better with residents. Subscribe now at citycx.info.
Oh, hi, I'm Dana Berchman. Welcome to Oh Hi Stories. In this episode, I sit down with my longtime friend and fellow civic innovator, Luke Norris. Luke is Vice President of Platform Strategy and Digital Transformation at Granicus and is one of the most forward-thinking voices in government technology I know. Luke's career has spanned helping cities rethink how they use technology to serve people. We talk about the intersection of data, storytelling, and trust in government, and why investing in people matters just as much as investing in tools. Luke also shares how his experience as a girl dad has shaped his leadership style and his passion for championing women in tech and public service. This episode is about modernizing government in human terms, rethinking civic engagement, rebuilding trust, and reminding us all why innovation in the public sector isn't just possible, it's essential. Well, I'm really excited to have this conversation with one of my favorite people, friend, colleague, Luke. Thank you so much for joining me today on this podcast. We've been talking about having this conversation for a very long time.
Long time.
I'm really glad we made this happen.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Of course, I was thinking about when our paths may have first crossed, and I think I know it was over a decade ago. I had come into the government space for the first time, really from the private sector, and I know you were working, trying to help modernize the way that governments interact with their residents and customers. And I was trying to remember, I think it might have been at a conference way back where we ran into each other for the first time and realized we had so much in common as far as our insights in this space. And there are, unfortunately, still so few innovators, I think, in the government space, in the public sector specifically. And so we're kind of a small knit community. We band together and sometimes we want to bang our heads against the wall. But what's really cool is I think you're one of the people that has stayed in this industry and stayed focused and seen the opportunity for continued innovation in the government space. So thank you for coming and having this conversation and obviously for the work that you do. And tell me a little bit about that. What led you to where you are today at Granicus and your career path and why you're so passionate about this work? How I know you are so passionate.
Yeah. Wow. Such a long story. So to try to make it short, in my role at Granicus, I lead a team that's responsible for helping our customers ultimately think about how technology and people and process investments can help them deliver better services, better engage their communities, and ultimately drive operational efficiency. So the three hallmarks of good government, if you will. I came to Granicus by way of an acquisition, a firm called Open Cities that I had an opportunity to help grow and build here in the US. They were actually from Australia. And the way that I originally got connected with them is when I was back at Code for America, we started to go down the path of helping local governments build better websites and digital services, and actually went so far as getting about $2.5 million from Reid Hoffman to help us create a government purpose-built CMS. And really, as the world works in mysterious ways, we were able to pull back on that investment after we found this firm, Open Cities, inside of Australia that had really been doing this. And then prior to Open Cities, I was at Code for America, but also to a company called Pay It, where I helped various governments modernize the way that they manage payments. And all of that comes back to me from an initial kind of passion for what I think a good mutual friend of ours, Jen Polka, talks about is the true way to drive scalable change in the US and in any organization or a world is really through government and technology. And I first got super excited about that when I was at a large publicly traded organization that helps billions of taxpayers, millions of taxpayers pay their taxes, and really said, hey, how is it that we have all of this information, but we can't actually help make our residents and our consumers' lives easier, specifically when it came to filling out the free application for student financial aid, and was a part of a team at that organization that ultimately helped think about how could you break down some of those process barriers and silos and ultimately help families get well-deserved access to federal funding that they probably didn't otherwise know about. And that was for me the first place that I really remember saying, wow, government and technology can have this really scalable impact in people's lives. And ultimately, because of SEC and IRS regulations, that work didn't continue at scale. But that passion of bringing technology to some of our most pressing problems in the public sector really stood out to me as an opportunity. And for the better part of now 15 years, probably, has guided a lot of the work that I choose to do and have the pleasure of helping governments think about doing in their own communities.
Yeah, I love that. I think about my first interaction at in Gilbert when I realized that they only accepted checks and cash for payment and no credit card, and I was like, "Wait, what?"
Yeah.
The average age was 32, I think, of the resident at the time, and yet we literally had no way to get payment other than these archaic methods, and you just see so much of that in that space. And I love what you said really about bridging this connection because I think it's really at the core of what we do. You said, delivering technology to engage the customer, and I just am so baffled still in this space, having never imagined I'd be
Good.
able to do what I did in the government space. I mean, I did this for, anchors at big national news stations, help them to figure out how to use Twitter and, digitize and modernize their services and never really thought about how that applied to government until I got to do it.
Mhm.
And now I just still see so much opportunity in this space to do it. You said it. If people don't know about the services you provide or what their government does for them, right? These are essential services oftentimes, like why your toilets flush, why your water turns on, why your
Right.
lights turn on in your house, why does your garbage get picked up? And yet, government doesn't do a great job at all of telling that story and the importance of it. And now, today, more than ever, I think people have distrust in government. So there's not a better time to be communicating in the way that people want it.
Yeah.
I think about something you said to me recently about how Granicus and I'd love to hear more about the new tools because I know you're doing a lot in the AI space and really in this customer experience world. But you talked about offering a text messaging service to cities. Why weren't they deploying it? Why weren't they using it? They were already customers of yours and you were offering them this new service, which we do know is how people want to be communicated with. They want to be communicated through text message. It's very expensive if you want to pay for a text messaging service. So here you were offering up at a low cost a tool to better improve communication to residents. And yet cities are like, I don't have the right people to manage it. I don't know how to manage it. We don't know how to tell people about it.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, they'll say, oh, yeah, we'll do it. But then they don't know how to deploy it.
Right. Or
Which,
right. They just end up using it for the sake of technology and not thinking about who are the residents and who are the customers that want to hear from us in text and
yes.
how do we create kind of authentic dialogue. Certainly now with Gen AI and through our digital agent, there's now more and more channels that residents may choose to use. And those channels may be different by various types of audiences. And that's where I think it's really helpful that we're able to now think about how do you choose the right channel to communicate and engage and ultimately serve people in the way that they prefer. And I think that's
Yeah.
one of the things that's both so exciting, but probably admittedly frustrating for even government practitioners. And you and I think about our public sector or private sector experience, right? Like at MTV, you had one very specific kind of consumer in mind, right? Even at MSNBC, you probably spanned the age range, but you had a pretty core consumer. One thing I think that's hard that so many folks overlook in government, you've got 380 million people across the entire spectrum of diversity, socioeconomic
Mhm.
needs, crisis, moments of not having a crisis. And all of that can be very difficult for organizations to ultimately make decisions about the technology. But in a lot of cases, they don't even know who the consumers are or the residents are that they're serving behind those. And that's where I guess like part of what we're trying to figure out at Granicus is how do we help our customers grow their audiences by better understanding who those people are
Mm.
so that you can ultimately better serve them and measure and optimize those experiences over time? Because the way that you and I probably are going to interact with government is going to be very different than someone who's in a shelter seeking housing in a moment in crisis or someone that's getting ready to apply for their VA or their Medicare benefits. And that's where we just have such an opportunity to really thoughtfully use technology to serve the individual people and drive much more human personalized experiences. And that's what excites me. And it is about making sure that governments see that technology alone won't solve that. They have to invest in the right people, skills, and right behaviors to be able to do that. but they also have to break down some of their process gaps that have sometimes held them back from using that technology in new ways. So it's a three-legged stool, but the opportunity is there for sure.
Yeah, you said a couple of things that I could not agree more with. One of them being not understanding who your audience is first, number one rule of marketing, in my opinion. And yet, that audience understanding and then the strategy behind it, I think that many cities still just get on social media to get on social media, or like you said, adopt a tool without understanding why or what they want to use it for.
Mhm.
And that was one of the things that I did in Gilbert, was really start with a digital roadmap, which was a plan, a strategy of how we were going to do it, where we were going to do. And I just looked to who was already doing it. And it was Michael Bloomberg at the time, as the mayor of New York, had a chief digital officer, which my job had been modeled after. And I took their roadmap, customized it for what would make sense for Gilbert, but it was something that the whole organization would be behind. And that tech component of it was a huge part of it. And I think in so many cities, that tech piece gets stuck in the basement of an IT team that
Yep.
maybe isn't connected to that strategy. So understanding, and you mentioned it, the skill sets, right? You can have the greatest plan in the world, but if you don't have people with the right skill sets to deploy it, it means
Yep.
nothing. And cities, I think, need to take a long, hard look at those job descriptions that they've posted the same job description, or they haven't posted it because the same person's been in it for 30 years and it hasn't been updated. And the person's still just using their filing cabinet and writing those press releases. And I hired the first data storyteller, I think, in the city space about 10 or 12 years ago. And I still don't see cities moving to do things like that, which I thought at the time, yeah, that was pretty forward thinking and ahead then. But now, to me, there's no reason why you don't have digital content creators, storytellers in this space, or people using data to
Yeah.
drive engagement and tell stories. And you said it again, the greatest tech, the greatest plan, without knowing and understanding who that audience is and the residents, and then having the right people to connect with them and be willing to be innovative and think outside of the box and take risks. And I know, going into the city space, I know the people you meet with to try
Mhm.
to go in there and say, here's what we have to offer you. Look at all these new, and sometimes it just falls on deaf ears. Sometimes they want to, but they know they don't have the right people to deploy it. And also, the answer isn't one body. We're
Right.
going to get
Way. Yeah.
a chief innovation officer, and now we're going to be innovative. And it's no, you know this so well because you go into so many cities and you see this. It has to drive all the way through the organization to the bottom. And
Yeah.
I know I've had conversations with you of, hey, do you know this mayor? Hey, do you know the city manager? How do I get to someone that can make movement? It shouldn't be like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, no, it's so hard. But to your point, that's where leadership really matters. How do you continue to get mayors and city managers, A, that understand they have different audiences to help vision cast or create a clear strategy, but also to believe and understand data? I was in a city council meeting sometime probably in the last year where a council member was even arguing over whether the end value of 1,000 residents in their organization was representative and statistically valid. So you have all of those things, plus then, the rooted of the data in the storytelling. Facts now more than ever are under attack in our
Mm,
organizations and certainly in politics. And that's where I think governments have a responsibility to truly talk to the facts, help explain to folks how decisions are made, why decisions are made, what
mhm.
data is informing those decisions. And so, to your idea of data storytelling, I agree. I saw it many years ago, certainly with the work that you started in Gilbert. And it's been one of those things where, again, it hasn't really taken off. And I think in some ways, it's this question of, is there belief in the data? And that's where I think, again, have to just keep centering on facts, but we have to make sure that new mayors and city managers and all of these folks ascribe to it. And so that's where it's great that Bloomberg and so many other organizations are doing things to upskill some of that capacity inside of those leadership roles. And then to your point, communications can't just exist in a silo either. It's everyone's job. Everyone's job has to be able to understand who it is. And you've got to bring clarity and tone and audience and all of these things to the forefront to make sure that people are communicating in clear and consistent ways. A huge challenge, but these ideas that you've got to center on data and be truthful in how you tell stories is, I think, critical now more than ever, especially as local news is missing from so many of our communities.
Hmm. Yes. So you mentioned Bloomberg, which I primarily still do a lot of work with what
Mhm.
they do. And one of the things that I love is in the city space, especially, you're exactly right on the data side, the people that I try to tell them this all the time, the people that are working with you want to work with you and they get it, right? They have identified those cities that have said, we are making efforts in this area, either to use data to try to get a data framework set up in the organization to understand it, and they want to make that change. I personally have been in a scenario where we had a mayor that wanted to do that, and then we had a mayor that didn't.
Yep.
And that also can be extremely frustrating when that direction shift happens. And you've seen this happen in a lot of cities. Either you lose that person at the top, and then how do you continue that work or that vision that was laid out suddenly when that person is gone? And I think that's a real challenge that cities are going to face is this: how does change outlast a mayoral term? And we've seen this happen. And it's scary because when the mayor goes, the residents are still there. They
Mhm.
stay the same and they require the same level of service, in my opinion, and still will, regardless of who their elected officials are, which half the time they don't even know who they are locally.
Right. Yeah.
And when you're inside the city, you think everybody know. You're like, oh, everybody knows what we do, and they
Or
think we're important. No, they don't.
no.
They're busy living their lives. They don't have a clue, which is why they need to be deploying technology and text messaging services and using AI to get people. And I was struck that the city of Denver said recently with their chatbot that they deployed that one of the top issues, actually, I think the number one top issue that came through was like, how do I find things on your website, looking for things to optimize your website? But the other two were people looking for food and shelter.
Mhm.
And so you mentioned that you wouldn't necessarily think that people who were unhoused would be using tools and technology to do it, but they are, right? And
Yeah.
and again, they're not going to show up in person. They're probably not going to write you an email or find a phone number to call, but they would be willing to use a chat bot and type something in quick and easy. And so this goes back to the data and what you talked about is like if we can't understand who they are and how to reach them to start, then we're lost. And I think you're right more than ever. I was always really struck, even in Gilbert, which tends to be a more wealthy, highly educated community, demographically young. But I would always get the excuse of like, well, they're not online. Like, and there's a huge part of our population that isn't. And when I actually looked at the numbers, it was like 97% of our community had Wi-Fi
Yeah.
access.
Yeah.
And they wanted to make so there was this misconception maybe or misunderstanding around, no, 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 actually only 3% of our population isn't online. That was in 2012. I can't even imagine what those numbers are now. And so we can't make that excuse anymore. And I think we talk a lot about meeting people where they are, making it easy for them to interact and give feedback too, because you said the statistically valid, because I used to hear that all the time. Well, we paid $250,000 through the National Citizen Survey, but we only asked people by mail or phone what they wanted. W- And
Right.
there,
Yeah.
there was your, you didn't even ask them online,
Yeah,
you
totally.
have.
And you're pointing at exactly what we've seen is yes, the mail order kind of surveys, of course, they help you reach all of your population typically in some representative fashion. What we've actually built with Granicus is our government experience insights kind of platform, which again has the ability to capture feedback across that customer journey or that experience. Because when you think about
Yeah.
it, sometimes I find what I'm looking for and I can get it done then and there. Sometimes I can't. And then I end up in maybe a part of a digital journey or an experience where I can't complete something online, or to be able to complete it online, I'm getting confused by the instructions. So these provide opportunities not only to capture feedback at the point of time that I'm having an experience, but also at the end of that is a great way to start to get some quantifiable or qualitative feedback around other things. So maybe somebody came in and actually just requested a trash bin or said my trash was picked up late or whatever it might be. Some of those create opportunities to start to glean some insights around who that person is or what they care about.
Mhm.
Then you can start to proactively engage them in some of these other opportunities, but also harness their feedback around, hey, do you think the city should have wheelie bins for trash? Or would you rather see more bike lanes? There's these opportunities where you can turn some of that surveying or trying to understand what people care about into actual new engagement opportunities. And you don't have that, to your point, when you just send them a piece of mail. They send it back and you lose the opportunity to continue that conversation, which is where I'm so excited that so many folks are starting to lean into more frameworks like the International Association of Public Participation, where you really have this maturity curve around whatever. Because again, it just can't be these static experiences. But again, that requires people to think about and approach and rebuild processes that, of course, have to have council buy-in, right? That somebody's going to say, yes, I want more data than just what the 2,000 people responded to in a survey. Still huge opportunities. The good news is I think more and more people are doing it. You're seeing more and more folks come into government and move quickly through new roles, especially as there's more and more retirements. So I feel like we're making progress. It's probably still not at the pace that we would have thought it would have been when we both got into the space 12 or 15
Sure.
years ago.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I'm staying in this space because I still see so much opportunity there. I always wanted to scale what I had built in Gilbert in a meaningful way. And I think that there is still a need and desire. I've had so many people be like, oh, why? Why would you stay in this city space? And I say, because again, now more than ever, I would argue that all of this, what I don't think we talk about that I love this that you understand and Granicus understands the customer journey because again, this is the way you would approach this experience in any private sector company, right? And yet government for some reason seems to really miss the mark on this. And again, meeting people where they are, they have opinions, they definitely want to be involved. But we don't make it easy for them. Government, when I say we, government doesn't make it easy for them. Don't expect them to come to a public meeting and it's 7 o'clock on a Tuesday.
Mm.
You and I were talking earlier about how our lives are consumed by our children and everything they do, right? And it doesn't mean that they don't care. People do care. They want to know, like you said, local news is dwindling, maybe slash dead. When I started out, even in Gilbert, I talked about us becoming our own kind of news source and knew at that point at that time you wanted to get as close to the source as possible. That was what was trusted and believed. And sadly, I think in like you mentioned today's world, it's like, well, are people going to believe if the government says? And you're going to have to fight even harder and tell that story more. It has to be more clear. You have to say it over and over again. You have to say it in every way possible. You need to say it in your e-newsletter. You need to say it on social media. You need to say it again
Yep.
in every way you can and be clear and concise about it. And I think when you talk about like having that strategic understanding, all of this translates to civic engagement, something that you and I think are at the core most passionate about in our work. And you talk about Code for America and, in my work with Choose or Lose at MTV, it was like always about getting people involved in all of this should translate when done right in local government to getting that bond passed, to getting elected officials, to getting good people to want to run for office,
Yeah.
keeping them there and understanding why that's so important, getting people to want to work in these jobs
Right.
that are being created. You can have the greatest job description, but if you can't get the right person into that role,
Totally.
it's not going to matter. So all of this is intended to drive that participation and that civic engagement, right? But the old ways don't work. We have to think about modernizing the
Oh,
ways
yeah.
of engaging.
Yeah. And that requires, I love that you brought up the idea of the jobs. Like you have to fundamentally rethink the hiring process. One of the challenges that I've seen sometimes is in local government, specifically in communications roles, so many of the people come from just a traditional media background where, it's been like we're one voice, we only talk officially through the news station and that's it, right?
Yep.
As compared to this idea of two-way dialogue and really creating
Mm.
conversations, which is where I know you and I are so aligned is right. Like every communications opportunity is an engagement opportunity and an opportunity to learn more about what people think, how they think, but to also get them engaged in boards or commissions or to help you go tell a story in the community. And I think that's where, again, mayors and city leaders have to rethink what is the new profile that we need? What are the new job descriptions? And so, again, if they don't spin out and create some of those new things, it's so easy for governments to stay stuck in their own ways, which is not what residents expect or want.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Yes. And another thing that I really have loved about getting to know you and something I know that you do, and it's become a theme of this podcast unintentionally, maybe just because I tend to surround myself with people that just really know how to prop up women. I think specifically something that you do is in your work and obviously as a girl dad, which I love talking to you about our raising our daughters. And something that I think is so critically important is like you really understand and I think see and have created opportunities to lift women up in this space. I know in the tech space and just even in the government space, I got to say too, it was rare to find yourself in rooms. I can think of the first IT meeting I ever went to, I think in Gilbert, I was the only woman in the room. And this is something you're really focused on and have been, I think, in your career and understanding how to lift women up in this space. And I think it's just more important now than ever to do that. And so kudos to you for that. But then also tell me about that journey for yourself. And then obviously now being a girl dad, why that is such a core tenet, I think, of the leader that you are, the father you are, because I think our listeners will take a lot out of that and appreciate.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I tell so many people I feel like I was born to be a girl dad, but I also was raised to be a girl dad. And I think now more
Mm.
than ever, women need champions that are fighting for their rights and helping champion their success, but are also empowering and encouraging them to use their own voice. And that's what I love as my role as an 11-year-old's dad, and 11 going on 22. Sometimes it feels like.
Oh, yeah.
But I was raised by all women, was born to a single mom. My dad left before I was born. Lived with my mom and my aunt until my aunt moved to Los Angeles. But even then was raised by my grandma, who was also all around. One of my cousins also was primarily lived with his mom, who had gotten divorced. So, I always said, not only did I get in trouble once, I got in trouble 4 times. And I heard from every single woman in my life what I did that wasn't right. But what all of those opportunities showed me is that there are so many ways that women can succeed, and all of them require support from each other and other people that help champion their success, whether it's someone that's just working extra hard to get noticed or someone that fights for their seat at the table. I've seen where that can work, but also in so many places where it hasn't worked, which has informed and just influenced some of my thinking that I always want to be a champion for that and for
Mm.
those causes. And I carry that with me in so many different ways, from helping start a school that could fund equitable opportunities for all kids to succeed, to being on a board for an organization that supports youth development and helping 10, 11, 12-year-old girls before they become self-conscious that they're not leaders, to actually realize that they do have a voice and to help them channel and use that voice. So love working with that organization, Madam President Camp, which is so cool. But yeah, I mean, it's just, it's like anything, right? Nurture versus nature. For me,
Mm.
it's probably a combination of both, but I've been so fortunate just to have a front row seat to seeing how women can succeed, but have to fight to succeed, and have wanted just to make sure that I do whatever I can to help all of my peers, all of my amazing colleagues be as successful as possible. And if that means me leaning back, which for me as an extrovert sometimes is incredibly hard, but it provides an opportunity to let other people lean in. And I just have maybe understood that it's a responsibility I have, and I wish more people understood that they had, just to help champion other people's voices, especially women's.
I love it. I love it. I too was lucky enough. People always ask me a similar question and I say, well, my mom was an English teacher and had me reading and participating and marching. Arizona didn't have a Martin Luther King holiday, and I can remember being very young and participating in marches. Way back then, my grandmother had a college degree, which was pretty much unheard of at the time, and so I think about her all of the time, and especially now, I think more than ever, I never imagined that in 2025, like, I'm raising 2 teenage daughters, that I'd have to explain things about, like, remind them, especially today, I think we need to do it more than ever, that, it wasn't long ago when women didn't have the right to vote and couldn't get their own bank accounts,
Yeah.
and I think we're on this very slippery slope at this moment in time where some of those things could be realities that we never even imagined or thought about. And I think our daughters, there's certain things where they would take for granted. And unfortunately, they're being reminded every day now, oh, yeah, look how far we've come. My oldest daughter just told me that they had finished reading a book and they were going to talk about the beauties and brutalities of the world. And she had to pick which one to do. And she's like, I'm going to pick the brutality. And I asked her what she had to come up with 3 examples. And her examples were slavery and deportations and treatment of women through time. And she was like going through, and we were talking about some of these things were happening today. Some of these things were things that had happened in the past. And I
Right.
was having this conversation with her, and it was so crazy because we come into this time of our lives where I think we're reminded as leaders, as people that we're hiring, the kids that we're parenting, how important these conversations are, and to talk about where we came from and the things that
Totally.
our mothers and our grandmothers faced.
Yeah.
Um, and I had this really interesting conversation with her, and all of this is so important. And I love that you talk about loving being a girl dad, because my husband's the same way. I don't think he would have it any other way than raising 2 daughters. But this is our future.
Yeah.
And to think that we would have to even question whether or not what that future looks like for them. I think that's another reason that this work in the public sector for me is so important. And we talked about trust in government and lack of it. And I never saw the work that I did in Gilbert as political at all.
Right.
I saw it
Really.
as nonpartisan. I mean, mayors, and at least in here, in some places it's not the case, but are nonpartisan positions, and they're here to serve all residents. And I think that's something that at the core has to come back in conversation. Like we talked about essential services at the beginning, that everyone deserves those and has a right to that. Doesn't matter what your political party is or if you're male or female. I mean, the crazy part is how politicized all of that has become. The first 10 years I was in Gilbert, I worked with 2 very, very conservative mayors. Never had an issue because it
Right.
wasn't about that. It
Right.
was about serving residents. And you've worked in this space long enough to know that, especially in local government, that's the beauty of it, is that
Yeah. Yeah.
you didn't have to choose a side. And
Right.
now everything has been so politicized.
Yeah, no, and it's hard. And that's where I think the responsibility is back on the citizenry to stay informed, to be curious. I talk a lot with a variety of folks that I see at a bunch of events, how even um, just given the political environment on a macro level, while yes, more of these races are still nonpartisan, I have definitely seen a shift from mayors, let's say 10, 12, 15 years ago, who were hired and voted for because they were governors, right? They knew how to operate and govern and lead with
Mm.
policy and lead with organizations. And you saw some of the teams
Yes.
that some of those folks were on, right? Like you think about Beth Flower now being at Bloomberg or GovX, right? Like she
Yes.
came from O'Malley, and there were these people that hired these amazing teams and built this structure that very much from Bloomberg and O'Malley became national precedent. Now you've seen even the shift where, it's now more activist type mayors where somebody gets elected simply because of a very specific policy initiative. And that in some ways, what that's doing is it's changing the focus of what these mayors are able to do. They just go hard charge at one area. They don't build consensus. And so that's where I
Mm.
think it's just important for the citizenry and me as a girl dad, or you, and certainly Scott
No.
as a dad, just to help make sure that everyone understands that like facts matter, voices matter. This is what the hallmarks of leadership look like.
Mm.
And you need to elect and hire and invest in leaders. And
Mm.
you yourself can be a leader. Because I wonder if that's part of it, is just if what we're all observing and have experienced is like that the understanding of what leadership looks like has
Mm.
actually changed.
Mm. I think that is a great observation. And when you can't see it, you can't be it. Back to my point about, I feel like I got lucky
Yeah.
that I had, and you got lucky.
And as you were
And no,
talking about your experience, again, I was thinking, I didn't realize, because I never observed that anything was different about my life. I just felt like I was super lucky to have 4 moms. But it wasn't until the last election cycle. I don't know that I understood that women couldn't have their own bank accounts or couldn't actually buy a house until the mid 70s. So it's like, even just thinking about what my life would have been like with a single mom and whoever, if she literally couldn't have had her own bank account or couldn't have bought her own house. And I think that there's probably so many people that are our age or whatever that assume all of that stuff happened in the 50s and the 60s and really still don't understand, like, to your point, no, this is stuff that happened like in the 70s. Like, we're talking like 35, 40 years ago. It still is so fragile in some ways because of that.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. And I love this idea of luck because I think you have to, if you're not lucky enough to have it in, your home, you go find it in teachers. I mean, we all know we can think of those people. And I always say that I was lucky. I had some amazing female bosses. I have had amazing bosses, male and female, but early in my career, bosses who were young moms who modeled to me that you could have it all, that, you could have a driving career and be a mom and do it all well. And I think when you haven't seen that before, it's so important to go and seek it out, but you're so right about modeling it in leadership, and we need more of it. We need it in the city space. We need it in our elected officials. I mean, my God, like just back to just normalcy and decency and like you said, what are those like core tenets of the things that we look for in a leader?
Yeah.
And I love that you say that because not everyone is going to be as lucky and you got to go work for it. I mean, I think about it in hiring and in casting TV shows that I did, telling that story, showing different perspectives, making sure that all voices are at the table. That is what this is all about. I didn't know that this conversation would come to this kind of full circle, but really that's kind of what's missing in the government, in the city space now, is that do we have all the right people at the table? Do we have all the perspectives that we need to serve our residents best? Do we have, like you said, the people with the skill sets? Do you have people that haven't been working there for 30 plus years? Do you, like you just said it, you said back in the 60s and the 70s. And I'm thinking, we got a lot of those people in government that have been there since then that are still there, that need to be either upskilling or modernizing the way they're thinking, or we will go back.
Sure.
It will fall back. And it's that pendulum that swings.
Well, and you think about the rate and pace of change in AI, right? It's happening faster than ever before. And we have a core tenet kind of inside of Granicus that you have to be able to learn and unlearn and relearn as fast as you ever had. And I think you're pointing at something that's so critical is governments have to prioritize professional development. I know this was many years ago, but I don't think it's fundamentally changed. The average government invested something like $50 per employee in professional development. And as you and I know, like that's a LinkedIn license, right? It's nothing that's highly specific, job specific.
Yeah.
And so certainly with AI, I think that's going to be the place now where how do you upskill people? How do you even think about critical thinking and the ability to interrogate facts and ask questions and test and build and retest and ask hard questions. So certainly, yes, all of those things, but governments have to invest in continually developing the people that serve the residents. And if they don't, that's where, again, it comes back to the idea of trust. That's where people will stop voting and stop investing in general obligation bonds or other things that help create healthy, livable communities that ultimately we all pay the price of. And so it's so funny to your point, like it's so obvious, but it is these like little things that can change so much. And if governments were able just to invest in those in new ways and bring new kind of approaches to the table, I think you could see a lot of improvement.
Oh, I love that. That is a great way to wrap this up. I think anyone listening, stop printing, stop mailing, and instead use that money to invest in your people. Make sure you have the right people, invest in your tools and your technology to talk to more people, to amplify your message, to engage your residents that way. You are so right about $50 or whatever. And yet, like back to my point about the survey, they're willing to spend $250,000 every year to run this survey by mail because we've always done it that way. Well, just stop one time and think about doing something differently. Put that cost savings somewhere else. And it doesn't have to be a huge investment. Sometimes it is really small. You can make big waves with small change. And I think that's where you'll see it happen. So I have just so loved this conversation with you.
Me
Thank
too.
you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'm so glad we finally made it happen. So
I know. Awesome. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Ojai Stories podcast. Please leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice and stay tuned for more episodes coming soon.
and visit our website at ohighcommunications.com.